The Judean hills were quiet that morning. The sun touched the dry earth, and the wind carried the scent of olive groves and dust. To the people of Israel, it was just another day of tending flocks, repairing walls, and trading along dusty roads. But behind those walls, in the heart of the kingdom, King David surveyed his growing realm with cautious pride. He had fought hard to unite the tribes. His victories over rival cities and leaders were celebrated songs now sung in every home. To David, the throne was solid, but fragile, like a finely balanced scale. His generals were loyal, his armies trained, his borders patrolled. And yet, beneath the surface of routine, tensions simmered. Whispers of dissent, of local governors testing the limits of their obedience. Rumors of enemies watching from the north. The battlefield was not yet visible. There were no arrows in the air, no cries of war. Just the careful preparations of a kingdom learning to govern itself after decades of strife. David walked among his men, noting the drills, the supply wagons, the scouts preparing to ride ahead. It all looked orderly, almost inevitable. A king and his people believing they understood the rhythms of their world. And yet, history has a way of hiding danger in plain sight. A single overlooked detail, small, seemingly insignificant, would soon begin its quiet drift toward disaster. For now, the kingdom seemed stable. But the first warning appeared almost invisible, a tiny blip on the horizon that most would never notice. A small group of scouts returned from the northern ridge, reporting unusual enemy movements. The force was small, maybe a few hundred men, but the scouts noted strange formations and weapons unfamiliar to Israel's army. In the council tent, the generals exchanged glances. "It's nothing," one said, trying to reassure the king. "They're likely scouts testing our strength." Pride and habit convinced them. After all, David's army had faced larger threats before and prevailed. To question the judgment of seasoned commanders seemed almost unthinkable. David listened carefully, nodding, but the faint unease in his chest was dismissed. To his people and even to himself, the northern border felt secure. And yet, the enemy was already moving, exploiting the subtle cracks in Israel's intelligence and communication. Messages between scouts and the camp were delayed. Small skirmishes went unreported. Supplies shifted to the wrong outposts. The unnoticed detail, an unfamiliar flag fluttering on the ridge, a minor supply error, the late arrival of a messenger, would quietly escalate into consequences no one foresaw. It was the kind of moment historians later call small, almost meaningless at the time. But in reality, it was the first thread pulling at the fabric of a fragile kingdom. David could not yet see it, and neither could anyone else. To them, the decisions they were making seemed rational, safe, and in line with tradition. But history has a way of punishing blind confidence, and the first snowflake of miscalculation had just fallen. What began as a small, overlooked movement on the northern ridge slowly began to ripple across David's kingdom. At first it was subtle. Scouts reported skirmishes that were dismissed as minor border disputes. Supplies arrived late, and some soldiers were redirected unnecessarily. Each small error, harmless on its own, quietly compounded the others. In the army's camps, whispers of unease began to spread. Soldiers noticed that the enemy seemed to anticipate their moves. Patrols that should have been routine ran into ambushes. Generals argued over strategy, but pride prevented them from admitting they lacked full information. To David, it still looked like ordinary military friction, a kingdom in motion, soldiers doing their duty. And yet the danger was growing. The enemy, though small in number, was clever. They exploited every misstep, every delayed message, every assumption of safety. What David and his commanders failed to see was how quickly a few tactical mistakes could escalate into strategic disaster. The kingdom's unity, once a source of pride, now became fragile. Governors questioned each other. Supplies meant for the front lines were stuck in transit. Morale began to dip. A single decision, dismissed intelligence, was quietly snowballing into a threat no one at the time fully understood. History rarely records these early moments, yet these are the moments that determine the fates of kings and empires. David's near miss was not a lightning strike. It was the slow accumulation of tiny oversights, each one invisible until the consequences could no longer be contained. By now, the northern ridge was no longer just a distant concern. The enemy had revealed themselves more boldly, raiding small outposts, cutting off supply lines, and testing the limits of Israel's defenses. The reports reached David in his command tent, stacked one upon another. Delayed messages, missing supplies, frightened soldiers. Each note seemed minor alone, but together they painted a picture of growing vulnerability. The generals pressed for immediate action. "Strike now," one urged. "We can crush them before they gain ground." Another argued for caution, but caution came with risk. Delays could embolden the enemy further. David understood both sides. A hasty attack could provoke disaster. Waiting could invite it. Pride, fear, and the weight of a newly united kingdom pressed down on him. And then the critical decision arrived: to pursue a bold frontal assault against the northern enemy, or hold his forces back and fortify his position. To David and his advisors, the choice seemed logical. A decisive strike would secure the northern border and reaffirm his authority. It was the kind of move kings were expected to make. What they did not see, what no one could foresee, was the trap the enemy had prepared: a hidden valley, carefully chosen terrain where Israel's forces could be surrounded, supplies cut, morale shaken. The enemy had turned small oversights into a dangerous advantage, and David's choice would determine whether Israel's unity held or unraveled. The kingdom held its breath, though no one yet realized it. A single decision, appearing sound and rational, was about to define the fate of thousands of lives and the stability of an entire empire. David gave the order. The army moved forward, ranks in formation, banners raised, spears glinting in the sun. On the surface, it was a show of strength, discipline, and authority on full display. To the soldiers, it seemed like a standard battle, the kind they had trained for. Confidence ran high, bolstered by the king's presence and the general's reassurances. But beneath the surface, the unseen threads of miscalculation began to tighten. The enemy had drawn them into the hidden valley, a trap invisible from the northern ridge. Supplies arrived late, and messengers struggled to relay orders through the confined terrain. Morale wavered as soldiers found themselves cut off from familiar paths, unsure of where reinforcements would come from. At first, the consequences seemed minor. Skirmishes broke out at unexpected points. A few soldiers were injured. A small detachment was forced to retreat. These were incidents that would normally be absorbed by any army, but the psychological weight on the commanders and the king was far heavier. Pride and fear now mixed in subtle, dangerous ways. Every hesitation, every cautious maneuver, carried amplified risk. And yet no one recognized the slow build of catastrophe. Each small setback appeared isolated, a minor problem easily solved. But history has a way of turning tiny cracks into deep chasms. David's logical decision was already snowballing, quietly setting the stage for the near collapse that no one at the time could fully comprehend. camp, battered but intact. Soldiers counted the missing, tended the wounded, and tried to piece together what had gone wrong. Supplies were replenished, but the memory of near disaster lingered like a shadow over every decision. David himself walked among the men, observing not just the physical toll but the subtle fractures in morale. Governors once confident were now cautious. Generals once certain in their advice questioned their own judgment. The kingdom had survived, yet barely. A single miscalculation, the dismissal of that small scouting report, had almost undone everything David had worked to achieve. To those at the time, the near collapse may have seemed like a routine hazard of war. Few recorded the event in detail. Many considered it merely another skirmish. And yet, in reality, it was a hidden turning point. The fragile balance of the kingdom, the unity of the tribes, and even David's legitimacy as king had all been put to the test. History often celebrates the victories, the battles won, the crown secured. But sometimes the quiet moments, the near misses, the overlooked warnings, the decisions that could have destroyed everything, carry the truest lessons. This hidden battlefield was one such moment, a subtle pivot point where the future could have shifted irreversibly. Centuries later, the battlefield is nearly invisible. Maps do not mark it and scrolls barely mention it. Yet the lessons linger, echoing far beyond David's time. History remembers the victories, but it rarely remembers the near misses. The moments when one small oversight could have toppled a kingdom, altered an empire, or changed the course of millions of lives. David's hidden battlefield reminds us of human blind spots. Pride, trust in incomplete information, and the assumption that tradition will always protect you can quietly steer events toward disaster. What seemed rational at the time, a decision to strike the enemy, to trust advisors, to follow protocol, nearly led to collapse. For modern leaders, military strategists, and ordinary people alike, the story carries a warning. Small ignored signals can snowball. Invisible risks, if left unchecked, can escalate quietly, creating consequences far greater than anyone expected. The survival of Israel that day was not inevitable. It was fragile, contingent, and nearly lost. And yet, from that fragile survival, a kingdom endured. David's reign continued, but the lessons of caution, vigilance, and awareness became etched into the collective memory of leadership. The past, if we listen carefully, speaks not just of triumph, but of what nearly went wrong. The sun set over the Judean hills, just as it had that day on the hidden battlefield. The dust settled, the soldiers returned home, and the kingdom endured. To the world, it appeared as though nothing unusual had happened, and yet the empire had narrowly escaped disaster. A single overlooked detail, a small miscalculation, a choice that seemed reasonable in the moment. Any one of these could have unraveled everything David had fought to build. History often teaches us through the loud victories, the epic battles, the kings and generals who emerged triumphant. But sometimes the most important lessons are quiet. They are found in the moments that almost went wrong, in the events nearly forgotten, in the decisions that could have destroyed entire civilizations. David's hidden battlefield endures as a warning across millennia. Vigilance matters. Small signals cannot be ignored, and human blind spots, pride, misjudgment, and overconfidence can quietly steer history toward catastrophe. And it raises a question we all must ask ourselves today. What small warnings are we ignoring in our own lives, in our work, in our societies, that could quietly snowball into disaster? History may have spared David's kingdom, but what lessons will we take from the near misses in our own time? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. How would you have acted in David's place? And what do you think history is quietly warning us about today?